Ciao, Patrick. Guten Tag, Patrick. Yeah. And yeah, thank you for taking the interview. We met, I think, what, like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, at least.
I was at the time managing sponsorships for Elite. I was doing some kind of micro sponsorships, trying to help them enter small sports. At the time, triathlon and women's cycling and mountain biking for them were smaller sports. I guess now the tables turned, and you asked me to coach you, so I was coaching you a little bit. You were my most successful athlete. Thank God you were a pro before, so I couldn't, you know, mess it up too much. And we stayed in touch since then. And you are a sponsorship consultant. Is that correct? You're a sponsor.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
You know, and you work in Germany and in Switzerland, or just mostly in Germany?
I live in Germany, and the company is in Switzerland, so I'm right at the border. So I cross over several times a week.
Okay, so basically you're a sponsorship expert for German-speaking market, for DACH, I guess.
Yeah.
And I've seen you develop and grow, and I was very interested in your LinkedIn post the other day where you said that sponsorship is going to be programmatic, and that just clicked in my mind. I was like, okay, there is something going on with sponsorship. It's going beyond the usual, we'll give you this much per year. So something's going on, maybe becoming like influencer or something like that, more detailed. So I'm just gonna, you know, let's start with, you know, not talking about Corona, just in general. How is sponsorship changing, ignoring Corona, like in the last year, two? What's the trend in general in sponsorship?
Well, sponsorship in the last 10 years, let's say maybe since the financial crisis, it was constantly growing worldwide, like 10 or 15% increase in revenue every year. What we see is that it's basically a general phenomena, but it's the same in sponsorship, that more money goes into even the biggest clubs and the biggest projects, and then there is no middle ground anymore. And there's still that micro sponsorship and supporter stuff around as well, which is good and which is very much needed. The main trend in the last few years is definitely digital. Everything gets more digital, and you mentioned that LinkedIn post. My point is, at the moment in sponsorship, we basically do the same that we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, with some more digital assets. But when you break it down, it's mostly still branding and exposure of logos, for sure, in the digital space and in social media and stuff. And for sure, it's more content marketing as it was before. That's true, and that's what happens. What didn't change, and what I think will change in the next few years, is the business models behind sponsorship. So what will change, in my opinion, or what has to change, is you say, I want to, as a brand, you do a sponsorship, and you won't be like willing to say, okay, my planning horizon is 5 years. This is our budget, and this is what we spend, and we spend it for this and that, and that's it. And then you have the strategy for 5 years. That's gonna change. So it will be influenced by online marketing. Basically, it will be much more dynamic and stuff, and sponsorship has to evolve in this area a lot, I think.
Okay, so basically sponsorship is copying what's going on with marketing in general, with influencers and everything like that. So sponsorship is following what marketing is doing, but applying it to the concept of sponsorship.
Yeah, sponsorship is basically a discipline, like, I don't know the perfect word for it, but you can use sponsorship in pretty much every marketing discipline, as well as in sales and employer branding and stuff like that. So it's more like a crossover discipline. So you can use a sponsorship subject if it's football, or if it's entertainment, the festival or something, and you can use that content as a brand in pretty much every possible way.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it interesting, I think.
Yeah. So what in your opinion, what's the most interesting sponsorship project you've seen? You know, like, I don't know, Nike sponsoring, you know, I remember Nike was, for me, it's always in my memory. I know Nike was sponsoring Kenyan guys like 20 years ago to do cross-country skiing. I don't know if you know that project. And they sponsored them, I think, for 2 years, and I felt so bad for these guys because one of those 2 or 3 guys continued to do cross-country skiing. And I was calling Kenya at some point, like to find this guy and say, can I please sponsor you? Because he was super motivated to continue doing, because Nike dropped them. But I just remember this concept of Nike taking Kenyans to cross-country sponsorship, which is kind of racist as well and weird. But that stayed in my mind for 20 years. Do you know any other, sponsorship that's crazy, that's unique, that's what's like the most interesting? It doesn't have to be good or bad, just like the most interesting. The what's his name? Kirkpatrick, the guy that took a knee that Nike, used very quickly.
That's basically a trend in marketing, in brand management as well, like what you call purpose.
Yeah.
So that the brand takes something like Black Lives Matter or other stuff that's relevant for society and uses it for storytelling and stuff. That's a pretty common trend. It's difficult for me to say that's the most or the best sponsorship. There are several good sponsorships. One thing I mentioned a lot in the last few months was an example from Switzerland, from Swisscom, a telecommunication company. They did a pretty nice activation with their art sponsorship. So they had a painting of Picasso, and they equipped it with all their data security technology. And they said, who wants to own this Picasso for 24 hours?
Mm-hmm.
So they made a competition via the Swiss newspapers and stuff, and people could apply, and they had to send in where they would put the Picasso in their homes and why they want to have it and stuff. And what they could show pretty good was their knowledge and their technology, so data security and stuff like that, and link that with the art project and a pretty good topic. And it was, for a very low budget, it got a pretty good media coverage in Switzerland. So that was, in my opinion, a pretty good idea. It was well made, well activated. Mm-hmm. And I like these kind of sponsorships, not always the sponsorships where you have huge branding worldwide with a lot of budget, but a good idea, a good story, and then you can play it well.
Okay. And technologically, is anything changing in sponsorship, in a sense that is there ability to sponsor much more, smaller local athletes instead of just negotiating with one, and someone is maybe calculating all the views, all the effects of that?
Well, maybe on the technological side at the moment, the most interesting thing is virtual the virtual branding in football. Mm-hmm. You have the LED branding at the in the stadiums, and at the moment, it's for a few years now, it's possible to in the live signal over the TV, it's possible to change the branding that's in the stadium on the LED screens, depending on which country the match is streamed to. So you can, when you have a Champions League match like 2 days ago, Borussia Mönchengladbach against Real Madrid, and it gets aired in China, you can have Chinese sponsors on the branding in the stadium. Oh, okay. But in Germany, there are obviously the German sponsors. So this is, but for the clubs that have an international relevance, for them it's pretty good, because they can sell the same item to a company in Germany, a company in Switzerland, and a company in China. Yeah. And they have better targeting, so it's great value for both. And I think this will evolve. At the moment, it's only possible in football and on the LED branding on the field, but this will be possible pretty soon, just with software, and you don't need the hardware stuff anymore.
Okay.
So there will be a lot more targeting possible at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So, and what do you think is like, okay, these are good examples. What's like the worst example of sponsorship that you can go on? What's like the biggest error, biggest mess? What's done wrong? Out of time, you know?
Depend on from which perspective you look at it. If you look at a perspective from maybe a club,
Mm-hmm.
or a rights holder. There was one example in Switzerland, which was pretty much a boomerang. The hockey club Davos sold the naming right for their stadium to a person who's how do you say it? It's a guy. He's 80 years old, and he hosts. He's pretty rich, and he hosts a lot of concerts and stuff like that. And he paid 1.5 million or something a year for that naming right. So the idea to do that was pretty good, but the guy is.
I'm already laughing.
The guy is kind of a questionable person, I would say. So he. The first appearance he made on TV as they made the sponsorship, which was it was big in Switzerland, and he appeared on TV in an interview, and he was sitting on a piano, and there was a 20-year-old girl sitting on the floor, and he said, yeah, the women have always been and should be a bit lower than the men and stuff like that, and that's something that's not appropriate not in this time and not in the past as well, and that's basically bad for the club as well, and they didn't intend something like that. And what I want to say is you shouldn't just look at the money, but in sports or even in other fields, you often need the money to fund your season and stuff like that. So it's appealing to do stuff, but there has to be what we call sponsor fit. So you have to share the same values, at least in some parts, and you should have a look at that. And if that's not the case, then it gets mostly worse.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that he was gonna name it in something funny.
No. Well, he didn't name it anything. He just spent the money and wanted to do concert jets there. So basically, the deal was pretty good, but the person behind it was not in line with the values of sports and the club and stuff like that. So and that
nobody's values. Yeah, that's a bizarre. Okay, yeah.
And that's even worse for other sponsors. They say it's the same with. If you have doping, or if you have a scandal like Tiger Woods, who had a few more women than his own wife at a time, where you can say that has nothing to do with sports and business, but in these times it has, because it has to do with shared and common values.
Yeah.
And this has always an effect on other partnerships and other brands as well.
Yeah.
Even if you maybe can't measure it directly, but you don't want to be associated with these topics as a brand.
So since you mentioned doping, the first thing in my mind is always Lance Armstrong. And, we both did triathlons, so I actually saw Lance Armstrong. I don't know if I told you. I tried to catch him once in South Africa on the bike, and I said hi, and he said hi, and then he sped off. I was not able to catch him, but so that's a weird story. I mean, I cannot figure out if he's in a bad position or in a good position, because, I mean, he made a lot of money, he sold a lot of bikes. I like when he says that before him, Trek was like a local nobody, and after him, it was like a multi-billion-dollar company. He built a lot of companies, and but I'm not really sure, so is that seen as a bad thing or a good thing? Lance Armstrong as a thing, as a concept, as something that happened? I mean, for us older guys, I don't know, or girls, I don't know if younger audience knows.
If you look at it from a business perspective, it's maybe a good thing, because he did sell these bikes, and he did bring exposure to brands like US Postal and other teams he was with. So
Astana, the capital, I think the company in Kazakhstan. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Because beside Borat, they always have Lance Armstrong.
Yeah. If you look at it just from this perspective, it's a good thing. Like in Germany, we had Team T-Mobile with also a big doping scandal. And if you merit the classic way you do it in sponsorship with brand exposure and amount of contacts the brand made and stuff, then they had their peak when there was the doping scandal.
Yeah.
So this is one side of it, and the other side is not every news is good news, and especially not in these times. So I think it's getting more and more relevant for brands to associate themselves with the right values, with the values they have and they stand for, and customer expect that a lot more. So yeah, I think it wasn't, let's take the bike company, let's take Trek. It wasn't bad for them in the long term, definitely not. But I wouldn't say and I don't think they are super happy with how it ended.
Yeah, it could be better.
And you have, there are always some things as a brand you don't have total control over everything. So these stuff like this can happen, and you have to ensure you have to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen as well as possible. So yeah, it was, as long as there are things you can't plan, and where there's a lot of money and there's business, there's always something who's gonna go on the wrong path.
Yeah. Well, another thing that really, I'm jumping from subject to subject, just because I'm getting another thing that annoys me, for example, in my work, because I work with sustainable companies that are making products that are not so pretty, like they solve serious issues, but they're not so pretty. And it's in construction architecture. And the problem is that because they're not so pretty, it's very hard to get them on Instagram or, basically architecture as an activity very much is now associated with hashtag architecture, which is, you go to Instagram, it's a very specific thing. I mean, it's part of architecture, but it's not really architecture. Architecture has to deal with sustainability, management, a lot of different things. And people now, the end clients, people who buy real estate, this is what they want. They don't want, later, before you could explain more in words and they had to read and maybe listen. Now it's just images and photos and Photoshop and renders, So, so basically this concept of hashtag Instagram thing, it kind of made architecture much stupider, because all the architects are going into that direction. And I remember when I was working a little bit with sponsorships, basically, of course, you have to tell people, do more photos, do more posts, do more everything, in the early days of social media, because, the more exposed they are, the better it is, the more pretty the photos, etc., the more quantity. But, how much is that actually changing? I'm talking about sports sponsorship, but I think it applies also to art. I'm an artist as well. There are great artists who refuse any kind of corporate association. And there are some artists which are, super rich and they don't care, they can really do whatever they do, corporate stuff, So I'm just interested how it's culturally changing, how much sponsorship and how much Instagram is changing, how they're working together, this visual effect,
I think sports, events, entertainment, and art and cultural stuff, these are the topics that most people are interested in. Like, for example, both of us, we've never met in person, which is a pity, but we didn't. But but we've known each other for like 10 years, and we come together like 2 or 3 times every year and have a talk, and we share some stuff in our interest in sports and stuff. So that's what people are talking about, what they are interested in. And as a brand, which basically has a product which isn't as interesting as a sports car or something else, they can use the topic sports or art or culture to provide content that's interesting, because it interests their customers as well. They also are interested in any of these topics. some more, some less, and you got to find the right topic which fits your brand and which fits your customers. So you can use sponsorship to as a brand to get access to this content and use this on your own channels. What the big sponsorships are doing with Cristiano Ronaldo basically is you pay him to do a post for Nike and share that on his channel. This is the big picture for a very few sports assets and clubs and a few stars, Roger Federer as well, where you pay them for their reach. And in this, on the other end of the spectrum, for smaller brands and maybe niche sports and stuff like that, I think for brands it should be much more interesting to use the content you get from being a sponsor in sports and in the cultural life to create and get content that's interesting for your customers and work with that.
But just sorry to interrupt you. What I meant is that there are two results an athlete or an artist or an institution can have. Is the real result, let's say objective result, like in sports is like a speed or result in a game. For artists is maybe reviews or something, like objectively the institutions and they say this is good. And then you have the second result, which is how pretty your photos are and how successful you are on TikTok or Instagram.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so obviously, I mean, the brand is going to go for the combination of both. It's the best if you have someone who's good in both, you know, obviously, like you said, Cristiano Ronaldo or someone like that. But there are also many, you know, who don't have the both. You know, there are athletes who are just really great athletes or artists, but don't really care for the other thing. And you have someone who's really good in content, but doesn't have really the results, but they reflect the lifestyle, etc. You know, they have a good story. So I'm just wondering how much is this going to change? You know, because there is a trend that results over time. I think the actual objective result is dropping in importance, and
it already dropped quite a lot.
Yeah. And what does that mean? I mean, why, you know, sport is becoming an amateur thing, basically. I mean, if you can just be a fitness guy, girl, you know, with a six-pack, that's what I see. Meaning, being from a sponsored athlete to being a fitness influencer, you know, it's easier to be a fitness influencer. You don't need to perform. You can just do, you know, what a beginner athlete does. You know, you don't need to perform the way you did as a professional athlete. You know, in the Deutsche League in triathlon, which is unbelievably competitive. You know, so. I'm just wondering if it continues going like that, where results are less and less. I mean, are people playing better football today than, you know, 20, 30 years ago? I mean, or are they just better at looking good on TV and Instagram, you know, or especially TV, especially Instagram, because now I think the Reuters or who publishes, I forgot the research, is that Instagram is the main source of news. Yeah. By far, globally, you know, so it's not TV, it's not Facebook, it's Instagram is the main source of news. So main source of knowledge about the world is Instagram. So I'm just wondering, where is sports going to be? Because sports depends on sponsorship, culture depends on sponsorship, and Instagram is the number one source of information. That's where they communicate to everybody else. So are we going to have like really shitty athletes that look great with a six-pack and a great tan, you know, like in 100 years?
You are absolutely right. When you look at sponsorship, the importance of results dropped massively. Yeah. And then there are things like what we call media athletes, which basically maybe wouldn't be good enough for a top 10 in their sport or for medal at the Olympics, but they look good, or they can create some good media content, and then they are successful on Instagram, on YouTube and stuff. And then they get sponsors for that, and that's okay, because they provide value for their sponsors as well. For the typical top-level athlete, the world changed, which is okay. So the whole social media thing is part of the business now, and when it wasn't there like 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't part of the business. But the world changes, and I think that's pretty okay. And some do it better, some don't. And if there's an athlete who says, I don't want to do this social media thing, then you gotta accept that you maybe don't earn as much money and don't have the possibilities also in sport to perform on a top level. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
When you look at it as society, the question is, how important is top level sports for us as a society, and do we want to have it? Because sponsorship, like private funded from private owned companies, is one thing, and it's an important part, but there's also like the federal support for sports and for athletes, which is at the moment still an important part, at least for the sports that are not the most commercial successful sports. So I think this is a bigger question than just a sponsorship question. How important is sports and its results? Are the Olympics and World Championships in every sport, how important are they for a society? How important are athletes as role models, and do we want to have them? And maybe we have to find some other ways to fund sports than just sponsorship.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know. Now that I asked you this question, I'm a bit worried. You know, it's like, you know, I don't know, because at least on TV, I mean, that's a problem in general. At least on TV, you had curators, you know, and you had people who decide with some taste, you know. And now the problem with current media is that it's algorithmic, meaning and algorithms are designed by people. I don't know how much they understand or how much they are adjusted to a specific like sport, you know, even cycling being a niche, I think, or art, you know, because I'm looking at Marina Abramovic, for example. She's from my country. I met her, and she's very, you know, she's always on Instagram. She's always doing these things to remain relevant. If she didn't do that, and she's like an amazing artist. I mean, historically, like Ai Weiwei, who's like answering my Twitter, you know, and is suing Volkswagen, not being sponsored by Volkswagen. So I don't know. It's just a bit scary at who can break through to that, and still how we can get results. Because if everything starts to be standardized, you know, I'm always worried about this thing where I did a road trip in America this year. I went from Miami to LA by car. I mean, America is amazing, you know, but there is one problem in America. It's always the same porridge. You know, I mean, imagine going from Lisbon to Moscow and just eating the same food. I mean, it's not like I didn't go to different restaurants and I didn't pay different. It's like I went through a price range, different states. It's always the same porridge. So it's a bit worrying, and it's shitty porridge. It's not really good porridge, you know. And so this worries me a lot, you know, is that I think in 100 years from now, sports and art, and because sponsorship is so influential, you know, I don't know how much governments are funding, you know, I think the governments are funding maybe less, and the private is funding more, and the privates are, you know, making decisions based on exposure. As you said, now the results, the actual objective result in the decision is going like this. And how does that affect the culture and the sports? You know, I think if we go in that like government less or not private, and then private increasing, and private decides on exposure, on algorithmic media, not on objective result. And then if we multiply that by 100 years, I mean, where it's going to be, you know, what do you think?
I think the private sector brands can still have there is that algorithmic part, but it's not, I think it's not everything. There is the tendency that it's getting too much. Well, if I look at my Instagram, for example, well, I am a bike and triathlon nerd, but I for sure have a few other channels there, but in my stream there's pretty much only bike content, because obviously that's the stuff I maybe like, and double tap, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So you're definitely living more in this bubble, and maybe what would be a good thing.
What I'm asking you, sorry, just to rephrase it, do you agree that that change is risky? It's possibly not good if it continues in that trend.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah.
And I think there is a responsibility from brands as well, and also a chance if you look at it from a marketing perspective, because there's always this one part where you have to decide with numbers, with reach and stuff like that, which is important for brands. And then there's the other thing which I call like inspirational stuff and communication. So if brands and the people behind brands, it's basically we're talking about people. If a brand or sponsorship manager is a guy who's or a woman who's not very who doesn't want to take risks, then he's going the main route. He's going to be a sponsor in football, and he gets the numbers and the results that he forecasted, and everything's fine. But I think we need the people that are more from maybe from the creative world, who like to take a few chances and a few risks as well, and let some athletes and artists tell their stories and use it for their brands, and don't look at the numbers in the first place. And I think these are the things that are that will get the numbers in the second stage, and that's the part that we live off. So I think, yeah, it is dangerous, and we have to look pretty closely at this stuff. But there's also a chance that brands can influence this stuff as well.
Yeah, so they can choose the objective results, or maybe something that's not just an algorithmic or media exposure already designed. Yeah. What can we do? So what would be a perfect solution? Because I still think that if it continues like this, that we're going to end up with like 1 million steroid-driven, fitness influencers, or artists doing like I don't know, art out of like colorful paint, that looks nice on Instagram. So how I'm guessing that we're kind of reaching the peak of algorithmic, and stuff. So we are very close to the peak. I think maybe in 5 years, 10 years, we're going to reach the peak, and something else is going to happen. Like something new has to happen. Like the algorithms have to be smarter, because there is only so much people can look at six packs and the usual things that are already being shoved in our faces for the last 5 years. So what do you think is the next thing? What is the next thing, the big idea that's going to replace this current thing? $1 billion euro question.
I honestly don't know, but
give it a try. What would you like the world to be for your kids? For us?
What I heard a few days ago, a thing that for many years, industrialization, we tried everything to, as society, we tried to get more mobile, to fly to the moon and to have cars and then planes and stuff. And then the digital part came, the digitalization. And we tried to invent stuff to do everything without leaving our homes, like online shopping, e-commerce, which is fine, which is in some ways good. We have now the situation that you shouldn't leave your home because of a pandemic. And we realize, oh, fuck, that's a pretty big problem if you're not allowed to. So what I want to say is, I think the chance is within experience stuff live in the real world. For example, I wasn't at all a fan of ski jumping, and I'm still not. But I once, a few years ago, I was invited to a World Cup, and I was standing pretty much next to the ramp. And when you have a guy coming past you with 100 km an hour and flying 120 meters next to your eyes, it's pretty impressive. Yeah. And before I always said, like, well, ski jumping is a sport where you do this once and that's it. But if you experience it in person, it's something different, and I can relate to that.
That's a good point. You know what I experienced this year in March? I was very lucky to experience a rodeo.
Yeah.
Have you seen a rodeo?
Not in life, no.
Wow, it's like I'm telling you, of all the sports I saw in my life, the #1 sport. I mean, the #1 sport. I mean, it's amazing. And the funniest thing is that immediately after they were riding the biggest bulls, they take them up to sign the autographs. And they were all it's messed up. But they're very humble people, you know, they really are. They really are. Like, it's a very unique sport. So it's, again, when you physically experience that, it's amazing. You know, it's really a great sport. You know, sorry to interrupt.
I think there lies a big chance if we can get people out and to get people to experience stuff in the real world. But at the same time, this is a pretty difficult task, because it's so much easier to scroll through a feed and see something that you like, and then the algorithm comes into play, and you get addicted to it. So, and kids get addicted to it. So yeah, it's difficult, but I think the big chance is there, because that's really emotions, and that should be more powerful.
I think you just said like a super genius thing, Patrick. I mean, that's really genius. I didn't think about that. You know, that the next point is, you know, that, you know, the way everything is virtual, so it's easy to manipulate it and to create false idea and a story. But when you see it live, when you go back to seeing it live, that feeling of seeing a live game or even a live performance, that's why I like to take kids to opera when we go to Austria. I mean, seeing opera, when they see opera, I mean, once I saw opera, for me, movies are a joke now. It doesn't matter how much special effects they put. I mean, opera is like, I cannot believe human beings can make what opera is. It's like the pinnacle of human capacity, I think, you know, to coordinate the game, the singing, the story, the music, the light, the scenery. It's unbelievable, you know. And I think opera was the pinnacle. Going back to that kind of experience is, you know, physical experience is really, that's a really good thing you said.
And I think it's always the same. Obviously, I have a lot to do with football clubs and soccer and stuff, and I visit quite a few games. But I'm no football fan at all. I don't know any players, and I'm pretty bad at that because but when you're there, it's always a great experience. Yeah. Always, no matter what, in small stadiums, in bigger stadiums, there's always something special about it. And this year, where everybody had to find some sort of digital way to communicate. Maybe you've seen it, the production from Tomorrowland Festival. No. They made it's pretty impressive. They made it like a digital festival with all their DJs and stuff. And if you look at the highlight video, it's pretty good, and it's emotional, and it's a very, very good music production, which was also quite expensive. And this is fine, but I've seen some data from them with like they sold more than 100,000 tickets for an online festival live experience, but the average watch time, I think, was below 20 minutes. And when you go to a festival, you are there for 3 days and drunk for 2.5, and have the best time of your life, and you won't have that in front of your TV or your computer. And we have to, I think, well, it's like always when we're talking, it's getting a lot more philosophic than.
Okay. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, with me, it's my fault.
We have to make sure that these live experience that you make them, and then you can use them in the digital world as well, and enhance it. Yeah.
Okay.
I think this real experience is something that maybe a lot of people at the moment miss, hopefully. Okay. And if we come back to that more, that's a big chance, I think.
Cool. Well, don't be shy. I mean, your philosophy is good. I mean, it's a good reminder. You know, it's up to the point. You know, you made it clear. I agree with you. Yeah, makes sense. I mean, cool. So, any questions for me? We have a few minutes left, I guess.
How's your business going?
I'm not a billionaire yet. Yeah.
Me neither.
No, not a billionaire. Just I don't know. I mean, have to finish a few more things in design. I've been like really super like thinking about some design problems for the last week, you know, and and then I have to invest the final batch, and then I have to do some designs in these days. So still a design phase before we can release 100% final product. Although we are selling and having clients on it, few learning, but that I have to make for January, February, I have to make that final investment and shape it. And that's kind of a gamble because you never know, and then after that, we'll see how it goes. So we are still in that phase. I'm very happy with it. I think we took a good general direction, but I have to decide on some features, what they're going to do. So design phase. Where I like to be, unfortunately, as a designer, it's where I like to be. If I was a salesperson, I would be super pissed off, which is what salespeople are pissed off, and developers are super pissed off. But as a design person, this is like
at least it looks good.
Perfect moment, yeah. Trying to guess the future, to imagine that I can control it. Yeah. Cool.
And your sportive career. So you mentioned you were running.
No, I ran 30 minutes. I'm dead. Like my average pace was okay. It was hilly. It's like 8 minutes a kilometer. It was muddy and hilly, but I was dying. It's like really overweight. Are you training?
Yeah, not as much as I want to, but I'm still in it.
I always remember that when we worked together, when you ran 16 minutes on 5K sprint, I think was a team world champs. That was 1 minute slower than Alistair Brownlee, if I remember.
Maybe 2 minutes, but
no, it was a minute. Don't worry. He cannot run 14 minutes on that. I don't know. It's a bit too fast.
I think that was 2011. But at the moment, I would be closer to maybe 20, 21 minutes.
No. You were fast.
Not running very much, pretty much in the mountain biking game still.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much. I mean, you made a lot of sense what you said at the end. Sorry we were going around, but I think I like what you said with digital and then going back to physical. That makes a lot of sense. Although, I mean, devil is in details. Now it needs to be figured out how. Cool. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Always good talking to you.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.